I was giving.
Hello.
Good evening, everybody. We're just going to wait. Thank you for being so prompt. We're going to wait a little, like 1 more minute. People are coming in. Okay. Terrific. So we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Scher with the Jewish Federation, and I want to welcome you to tonight's Shema Listen Speaker Series, Creativity Out of Crisis, Using Ancient Wisdom to Reimagine What's Possible. This is sponsored by Jewish Federation's Community Leadership and Engagement Department, and I am so thrilled and honored to welcome our very special guest, Dr. Erica Brown, who will lead and guide us through an interactive, thought-provoking, and inspiring program. It's been a really long time since we've had Erica in St. Louis teaching us and learning with us. And although this isn't quite what we had imagined at this time, we could be more thrilled that she is with us this evening and we get to really learn together. Before I share a little bit about Erica, just a few housekeeping. Please make sure you're on mute. I did mute you all, but we will give you an opportunity to unmute. Make sure your screen is in speaker view, because then you will see her. And if you have questions, please use the chat function, and we will make sure to get to those, as you will be muted. So I'm just going to share a little bit about Dr. Erica Brown, a little bit of background about her if you don't know her or haven't read any of her 12 books that she's written, but she's the director of the Mayberg Center for Jewish Education and Leadership and an associate professor of curriculum and pedagogy at the George Washington University. As I said, she's the author of 12 books on leadership, the Hebrew Bible, and spirituality. Her newest book is the Book of Esther, Power, Fate, and Fragility in Exile. Erica was a Jerusalem Fellow, is a faculty member of the Wexner Foundation, and we just had a Wexner group graduate a couple years ago, so they all got to be with her, very jealous of that. An Avi Chai Fellow and the recipient of the 2009 Covenant Award for her work in education. She has been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Tablet, First Things in the Jewish Review of Books, and wrote a monthly column for the New York Jewish Week. She tweeted on one page of Talmud study a day at Dr. Erica Brown and has a daily podcast, Take Your Soul to Work. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Erica Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I want to thank everyone who put this event together, particularly Marcy, who's been a treasured colleague for many, many years. It has been so long since I have been in St. Louis that I did not realize that St. Louis is in a different time zone. So I am right now officially thrown myself under the bus because I think, are you experiencing a little lag time? Yeah, okay, so hold on, I'm gonna just switch to my other camera. There we go. All right, so that should be a little better. Okay, so anyway, I didn't realize, and I was teaching from 8 to 9 on Eastern Standard Time. So I just want to apologize for the inconvenience. And I was so excited to see you that I wanted to be in your presence and see you tonight. So I'm really glad for the flexibility and thumbs up to Diana, who shout out to Diana for helping make this happen on a technical aspect. So we're going to talk about creativity through chaos. And I would say that this has been a very, very creative time for me. As someone who writes a lot, you don't get this kind of time unless you get sent to prison. And so far they haven't caught me, so I'm okay. But in all seriousness, I think I'm watching among a lot of leaders that I'm in contact with, 2 reactions. There are leaders in the first camp who are paralyzed by this situation, who understand that the work they do is just going to be good enough for now. That's what we're doing. We're going to be good enough for now, because honestly, I can't ask people who are homeschooling their kids and pulling out their hair and working at all hours. I can't ask any more of them. In fact, an NPR journalist recently said, and just shared this with you because it really resonated with me, let's not call it let's not call it working from home.
Football?
Let's call it living at work. So
Living at work, she's talking. You want to
let's
listen to
call
her?
it.
If you could please.
All right, I think we're just going to mute. So anyway, this idea of living at work is descriptive for a lot of us. We're working all day and then working later into the day. We start early. We're not commuting, so we use that time to do extra work. And so we're in this kind of odd situation. So in the first camp are leaders and employees and professionals and parents who are just in survival mode. Let me just get to the end of the day. And then there are others. And this, by the way, has not been linear because some people have changed over time. They overcame the paralysis and and what I kept hearing people say, which is, I did not sign on for this. I don't know by a show of hands how many of you people have said this. I certainly have said this in the beginning of COVID. I did not sign on for this. I don't know how to do this. I didn't sign on for this. And then you say to yourself, there are a lot of things in life that you don't sign on for. One of them is someone else signed you on for this. And as a result, when you think about what it means to be alive and vibrant and contributing right now, that takes us to group number 2. People who actually have leaned into this and said, this is an incredible moment in time. A time that hopefully will never be replicated. And, people joke about being unprecedented, but there's something to that of saying, what can I do now as a parent, as an employee, as a Jew, as a leader, as a volunteer, that I simply could not do before. And people with a more entrepreneurial spirit will come out of this much stronger, and their organizations will be stronger, their job security will be stronger. Now, that's not true for everybody, and I don't want to present a Pollyannish picture of just how difficult it is. I have a daughter who's a physician. She's on the front line. She's had COVID. I have the anxieties that every mother has, and maybe a few more. And so I appreciate that this is a difficult situation, but I've watched people rise to kindness and creativity in ways that have been really astonishing. So I want to start by just asking you if you have been the beneficiary of someone's creativity, or you've done something particularly creative in this period that you want to share with us. Don't be shy. You can drop it in the chat room if it's more comfortable to drop it in the chat room. I'd love to hear from you, but I'd also really appreciate if one of you was my best friend and you unmuted yourself and you jumped in.
I started a school.
What? Okay, let's go back. Go.
I started a school.
You started a school. Like, you just say that as if, last week I started a school.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you give me some description of your school?
Yeah, it's me and 6 middle schoolers, and they come to my house every day with masks, and we stay 6 feet apart, and we've got, air filters, and we go outside as much as we can, and I teach middle school to these 6 kids.
What is your school called?
The Blau Project Middle School. My last name is Blau, so, very creative.
Very creative. I love it. I think that's amazing. And are you related to the Blaus of YU?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, so they could be involved in a different project. But anyway, this idea, now I don't know, Cheryl, if you're going to continue or you're not going to continue, but it's an amazing thing that you've done. It's amazingly creative, and it may lead to things, and who knows, right? That's the beauty of it. Who knows?
But in the meantime, right now, these 6 kids and I are having the best time.
Right.
Because nobody's watching over our shoulder telling us what to do or how to teach. And, today we had the kids were talking about Papua New Guinea. And I know a relative who visited there. So he came on Zoom and he told us the story of these tribesmen that he went and he saw, and then we were talking about Columbus, and the kids were like, well, didn't the Egyptians and the Phoenicians, didn't they have boats? So we got on the computers and we started researching all the other ancient peoples who knew how to make boats before the Europeans in the 1400s. So we can take it in any direction, and it's just delicious.
All right. Now, I'm imagining, Cheryl, that one day in the future, maybe 30 years from now, someone becomes a teacher and they said, you know why I became a teacher? Because I had the most awesome teacher during COVID. It was unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
Because we don't know, there's unintended consequences of all of our creativity. So let's do it. Let's do it. All right. Now, it's really hard to go after Cheryl, okay? Because, I mean, okay, what's next? Like, all right, what did you, I made a roller coaster. I don't know. Give me something that you've done that's creative. Someone else. Thank you, Cheryl. Drop it into the chat. It doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be big. Anybody here take up an instrument? My husband has been playing a lot of saxophone. And let me just say, our house really isn't big enough. Anyone else? No one's taken up a music, language. Anyone doing master class? Is anyone doing master class online?
Yes.
Yes, Shirley, what have you done in master class?
Excel with Sheer
Oh, Excel.
from JPro.
Okay, with JPro. So I need masterclass as in there's a masterclass, as a company masterclass. And I have done writing classes with Joyce Carol Oates, with Malcolm Gladwell, with James Patterson, with Dan Brown, with David Sedaris. I've had it's been amazing for me, right? That's been amazing. And so if you feel free to go on, I think there's a Black Friday sale. It's been wonderful. And I've learned so much. All right, so Lindsay's taking voice lessons for the first time. I don't know if I should ask you to sing, Lindsay. Could be risky. I don't know. Jay is taking flying lessons. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Marcy is using Zoom for fun, interactive community building, and didn't know how to use Zoom well before March. Thank you for admitting that. For new learning, right? This has been unbelievable. I mean, honestly, I have my son gave me for one of my birthdays a bag of VHS tapes. All right, that is the level of my abilities. And all of a sudden at GW, I spent my spring break where I was supposed to be teaching in Amsterdam, learning how to conduct the rest of the semester on Zoom and get my students finished so that they could graduate. I mean, it was actually a nightmare. And at the same time, look at the developments in technology and in medicine that we have had in the past few months. They have been off the charts. Anyone else want to drop something in the chat room? Finding time to bake and explore being in the kitchen. I've written, Max, you've written 5 short stories. Send them over, Erica Brown at gwu.edu. 5 short stories, amazing. All right, so this has been a creative, I talked to some neighbors and discovered we really like each other. And now we get around the campfire. Oh my goodness, you're unbelievable. Hello, Adina Raskus, hiding there in the corner. Oh, Emily's learning Hebrew, great. So this has been actually a very generative time for a lot of people. And I wanna actually look at some sources with you. And I wanna look at a painting with you. I was very struck by this painting. All right, hold on. Okay, you see it? Thumbs up, you see this? Okay, great. So I want to look at this painting. This painting is done by a Canadian artist, Robert Gonsalves, and who died in 2017. And it's called Making Waves. And I encourage you to go online. This isn't something I would hang in my living room, but I'm really intrigued by a lot of the very creative images that he has. And I really thought a lot about 2 experiences of COVID and of leadership in looking at this. There's the interiority, there's this sense of continuously being indoors, of getting tired of our own environments, tired of our own food, and the fatigue of this gentleman in the center, this woman in the center, I think describes what a lot of us are experiencing. This sort of, and in fact, if you're a Times reader today in the science section, there's a whole piece on combat fatigue, the feeling of fatigue that a lot of people are feeling who are first line responders to COVID. And yet you have something else going on in this very same image. You've got a kid listening to music of a shell, and you can see there's this sense that this couch is being transported on the waves of this child's very vivid imagination. And you actually have what I think is very endearing on the right side, this open suitcase and a shut suitcase of imagining all the adventures that one could go on. So what I want to do is define creativity. For those of you who are listening to this and saying, you know what, so far that's not me. I have not baked a cake. I have not opened up a school. I have not learned to play an instrument. I'm not speaking Hebrew. So I want to just think a little bit as a group collectively about the nature of creativity. I'm just going to take a standard definition: the use of imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of art and artistic work. I think you can see that in the painting that we chose. And then there's synonyms, and I love these synonyms: inventiveness, imagination, innovation, innovativeness, originality, individuality. And I'm going to look at some Jewish sources, and then we're going to go back to some reflective questions. Because creativity, I mean, there are a few aspects of Jewish creativity that I want to think about with you. And I want to think about two of them in particular. The first is the first chapter of Genesis. That what you have is not necessarily a creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, but a creation out of something, the creation and imposition of order on chaos. And when you look, there are a number of scholars who believe that chapter 1 of Genesis is what we call sui generis. There's no other chapter of the Bible like it. And we tend to think as Jews that our great contribution to the world was monotheism. That comes a little bit later. The greatest contribution, perhaps, is the notion of creation in an orderly fashion, a creation that is blessed, and the fact that the things that are created, whether it's animal life, vegetable life, human life, all of these have the capacity to regenerate themselves. That was a revolution in the ancient world. If you compare our literature to ancient literature of the time, ancient Near Eastern literature of the time, or if you remember the days of Greek and Roman mythology, who had, by a show of hands, a class, for me, it was 8th grade, it was 9th grade literature, where you had to memorize the Greek and Roman gods. Anyone else have that? Okay. I don't know about you. I remember that Diana was the princess of the Hun. I remember, oh, why do I have to know the Greek version and the Roman version? I couldn't get it straight. But one thing I remember very strikingly about learning mythology, and that is the world was a place of inherent chaos. Not only was it a place of chaos, gods competed with human beings and bested human beings. And the world seemed very violent. And in fact, if you look at creation narratives in mythology, in ancient mythology, creation of the world seems to be an accident. And in that same period, we have this revolutionary text, where God creates intentionally through speech, right? Through meditation, right? Premeditated act, the act of creation, and then the act of evaluation. And where God says it is good, it is good, it is very good, we also get to a point where God says it's not good. Lo tov hayot adam levado. It's not good for human beings to be alone. Adam didn't say, I'm kind of lonely here. God said, I'm looking at my creation the way an artist might and saying, not everything is the way that it really should be if we're creating something in a powerful way. So we tend to look at Genesis as, a story that we recognize about the way that the 7 days of the week were created and various aspects of nature. We don't look at it as one of the most revolutionary texts that's ever been written about a created world that was created with intention and blessing. And the blessing was that you should go on, whatever species you are, should go on to recreate itself. It's a phenomenal act of creation. And I want to now talk about a second experience of that, not the creation of the world, but the creation of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So that was the project of the Jewish people, most successful annual campaign ever. And the creation of it required certain kinds of people. All right. By the way, any questions, any comments, just hop in. V'daber Hashem el Moshe lemor. We're at the top of this page. God says to Moshe, I have called Bezalel. I found someone, Bezalel. Now, of course, where do we know that term, Bezalel? When we speak about creation in Genesis 1, we're actually, if you remember, we're created B'Tselem Elohim. We're created in the shade or in the image of God. So it's no coincidence, I think, that the person who is most responsible for the created space of the Mishkan is B'Tzalel, continuing on the creative process, if you like, creating a little piece of the Garden of Eden in our midbar, in our desert experience. And what does God say? I filled him with the spirit of God, Ruach Elohim, b'chachma, uvetfuna, uvedat, uvechol melacha. I've given this person understanding, but not only wisdom, right? There's all kinds of knowledge. There's book knowledge, there's street smarts. This person has knowledge, and he also has workmanship, great craftsmanship. Thoughts, comments? Does someone want to jump in? Okay. And then, and he's working, this person is working in very valuable materials, right? Gold, silver, and brass, and cutting stone and carving. It's very hard. If you've ever tried to get a contractor to build something well, it's hard. It's hard to supervise someone who's supposed to be doing an amazing job and filled with the wisdom. You say, why didn't you be filled with wisdom? Really, all you need is to look at the the architectural print, look at what you're supposed to do, and execute it. But as we all know, life is not only about executing the tasks. It's about the way in which you execute it, so that people feel trust and credibility in this enterprise, in this first joint project of the Jewish people. And as we continue, we have a similar sort of language later on in the story. And specifically, I want to understand the kind of characteristics that come with creativity. Chacham lev, you want to be a chacham lev, some kind of heart wisdom, so that you can understand everything that God wants of you. And let's look at verse 2 here. That God puts wisdom and kol asher nasa libo. It's not only that there's wisdom in people, it's that when someone feels their heart stirred to come and do this work, those are two different pictures of creativity. And I want to talk about these two different pictures of creativity and how they impact us in the Jewish community. There are people who have specific expertise and skills. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, he talks about the maven, right? You need the mavens, the people who know. But it's not only the people who know, the Betzalos of the world, it's also everybody whose heart is stirred to do the work. They're your volunteers, and they're critical to the work too. Those two together, because they execute and carry out the tasks that the person who's the expert determines, right? They're the connectors they're the doers, they're the people who make things happen. And those two things are necessary for creativity. So for example, you might have a great and creative idea, but you just don't know how to execute it. Or you can have someone who's super skilled, but they can't actually get buy-in. They don't know how to create buy-in and get other people to do that work. Anyone want to give me an example in your own work? It can be in your philanthropic work. It can be in your professional work. It can be with your family, where expertise meets that willingness to volunteer. And it makes an incredible team. Anyone had a great idea and you needed to bring people in? Don't be shy. I want to be very proud of you. I'm going to be very proud of you. Well, let's ask Cheryl. Cheryl, how did you start your school? You have expertise.
I do. I have expertise. I've been teaching for 30 years, and I also have passion, so I got lucky.
Well, so but you need, in order to have a school, you needed students. How did you get them?
I talked with people. I posted on Facebook. Now, for that, I had to ask people because I wasn't on Facebook, right? Okay, so there, I had to ask people, what is Facebook? How do you do this? So I had to find people who could help me with those aspects of it, because that part I had no idea.
Right. So that's interesting, it's expertise in one thing, but not expertise in another, but knowing enough to know that you got to reach out to people who can make it happen.
Right.
So
and then also the legal aspects I'm not a lawyer, so I had to, hello, legal Zoom.
Yeah.
So you go to the people who know, who have the expertise that you don't have.
Right. And sometimes, people will discourage you from doing things. Wait, hold on. Emily says we reformed St. Louis elections with a combination of experts and volunteers. That is a fantastic example. Now, a lot of times you want to do something, but you speak to people who are experts and they say, no, can't be done. Has anyone had that? No, can't be done. No, in your life? I've had so many people like that in my life, right? Professor no, doctor no, principal no, teacher no, who you gave them an idea. You said, I think this, we've tried that already. We've done that. It just hasn't worked. And I think actually the one aspect of creativity, which I particularly, oh, yes, they told us that. Thank you, Emily. One aspect of creativity, and I think you see it commonly in creative people, is that their first response is yes. They want to be people who, because yes is an expansive view of the universe. So I'm going to just show you something that is on my desk. Start with yes. And I remind myself, I try to be that person, but I also have to remind myself that there always is that inclination to say, yeah, no, I don't think it's going to work. And I can be yes with lots of other people at work, but no with my kids. So I have to remind myself, start with yes. That's part of the creative prospect. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get there, but it means I'm entertaining the possibility of a changed world. That's going to require, in order for us to all be successful, and in order for Jewish organizations to come through COVID and come through whole or changed, we are going to have to think very, very creatively. And there are a lot of people who are not leaning into this moment. They're not thinking creatively about mergers and acquisitions and joint fundraising and thinking differently about programming. They just can't wait to do the same old thing that they used to do. And you hate to break it to people. We're never going to do that again. Right? I can tell you, being on a college campus, or I should say being in my study and pretending that I'm on a college campus, I can tell you that higher education will never look the same way again. Will never look the same way again, because GW costs about $70,000 a year for an undergraduate. And if you're a parent and you're paying for a screen experience and your kids aren't getting it, there's only a limit to how long you're going to be willing to pay that kind of tuition, right? It's just not going to work. But I want to tell you, for all the people who are mourning that, I think it's about time. This could be the greatest thing that ever happened to higher education. It could be the greatest thing that's ever happened to fundraising. It can be the greatest thing that's ever happened to politics, right? I can see the reach of education. I really resented having to teach on Zoom. And then all of a sudden, I started teaching in South Africa, in Australia. There were elderly people who couldn't get out of their house regularly, who started coming to class. And my regular Monday night class now has people from all over the United States. There's something happened. The reach has changed. The capacity for impact has changed. And that requires a certain degree of creativity. So I want to actually think, for those of you who are saying, I get this, Erica, but I never called myself a creative person. Can you become this? So I want to look at some quotes of people from the writing community and others. The first I'm going to look at is Steve Jobs. If you haven't read Walter Isaacson's magnificent biography of Steve Jobs, that's a great reading. It's a good Hanukkah present. It's really interesting to think the way that he thought. And one small thing, as a strictly Apple family, that I've noticed that I'm truly entranced by, is that although Steve Jobs really struggled in university, he took a class in Japanese calligraphy and he was very taken by Japanese art. So if you look at the sleekness of Apple products, even the way they're packaged, there's something very beautiful and Japanese about it. Had he not taken that class, he might not have been able to combine computer expertise with an aesthetic that made everything look simple and look manageable. So here's what Jobs says, and I think the example that I just brought you exemplifies it. Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. they just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things. Twyla Tharp, in the end, there's no ideal condition for creativity. What works for one person is useless for another. The only criterion is this: make it easy on yourself. Find a working environment where the prospect of wrestling with your muse doesn't scare you, doesn't shut you down. It should make you want to be there. And once you find it, stick with it. To get the creative habit, you need a working environment that's habit forming. All preferred working states, no matter how eccentric, have one thing in common. When you enter into them, they compel you to get started. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to ask you about a work environment which, like Twyla Tharp says, which compels you to get started. What kind of work environment is the best work environment for you? And if you can create those conditions, magical things happen. Feel free to share. I can call on you. I can voluntold you. Give me a work environment that unleashes some creativity for you. Mayor, you look like you want to say something. I want to hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Well, I find myself creative in the kitchen, cooking.
What's your specialty?
Which I never done before, but especially baking and cooking. Otherwise,
I'm going to put my address in the chat, okay? You can just FedEx something over, right?
yes.
It's interesting how many people have unleashed creativity in the kitchen who formerly never went into the kitchen, right? My husband started challah baking. How excellent is that? Someone else, a space that really generates your creativity. Bonnie, Lisa, Terry, Shirley, Laura, I want to hear from all of you, something. Bonnie, you have a nice red background. It feels creative to me. Is that are you in a good creative space right now?
It's a very creative space. It's my dining room. It's my accent wall. And when you enter my home, the first thing you look at is the red wall, and people comment on it. So at least from the standpoint of enjoying a meal in this room, I guess that's my creative way of doing it.
Yeah.
But I find creativity in my retirement because it gives me an opportunity to use those past experiences and skills and help mentor the next generation, for example, and also be able to share any of the experiences that I've had, and people will ask me sometimes to do that.
Awesome. I mean, I'm inspired by your space. One thing I noticed that's interesting is people in their professional lives have really thought aesthetically about their backgrounds, about the space that they're in, and changing those backgrounds. What does your background say about you, right? Or not say about you? So it's interesting. And the spaces that we pick to let people into our lives, which has become very personal. In fact, there's a whole discussion in education. Should you comment on a student's background? And I feel like it's there, right? It's there. They're letting you into their lives. How could you sort of not notice? Why wouldn't you actually say something, what a beautiful painting, or how interesting that looks? I actually had an amazing experience. I was teaching a class, and a man was standing in front of a beautiful painting. And I said, that painting looks like it was done by this artist. And he said, it absolutely was done by this artist, and he connected me with the with this artist whose style is particularly beautiful. So there's creativity in the space, and maybe one of our tasks might be: am I putting myself into a space which unleashes my creativity? There's also creativity in friendship, and this is a particularly important topic to me. Anyone here been the recipient of a friend's generosity during COVID? Someone did something particularly creative for you. Karen, you look like you're shaking your head, so jump in. We want to hear.
Okay. I will say it didn't happen to me, but it did happen to my husband, who actually tore his Achilles tendon 3 months ago. And friends of his, we both went to Indiana University, and my daughter's there, and friends of his drove all the way to Bloomington, Indiana, to get him something from Indiana, because he's still a huge fan, to bring it back to him. And they told me that they were going to visit people anyway, or what have you, and that's not the case. So they went so far, 4-hour drive to pick up a bottle of vodka. So
Amazing. That's amazing. And how did he feel?
he was so overwhelmed because he was also hurting and in this physical state where he couldn't walk, and to have a friendship like that was just,
Right.
he'll never forget it.
Yeah, that's very moving, right? You don't forget those things. Someone else? Some friend did something particularly creative for you? Something you did that was particularly creative? Maybe for yourself, maybe for one of your kids, maybe for one of your grandchildren? To just ease up this difficult time period?
Yeah. Well, two things. One is my son lives in Chicago and he's very COVID avoidant, and he works for a hospital, but he's been working at home. And all he's gone to is his neighborhood grocery store and walking the dog pretty much with his wife. So last week we sent him a box of fun food from Trader Joe's, spices, things that wasn't perishable, just for him to have something fun. And he was so excited that because he said, I haven't been to a Trader Joe's in 9 months. This is so fun. Thank you. Thank you. And I said, was there anything else you want? He said, yes, it's all perishable. You can't send it. So we're going to do that for my mom and my sisters who live in Philadelphia area.
Yeah.
But I had a big birthday this year, and my family and my friends went out of my way to make it very special when I thought it wasn't a big deal.
No,
And-
Mainway?
Yeah. Yeah, they made it just a really, really special weekend. I got flowers one day, a cheesecake from Juniors in New York. We usually always celebrate something in New York and Juniors. And we went to an outdoor winery for lunch, and my sister-in-law sent a bottle of wine. It was just, and I had a friend author an amazing poem spanning the 35 years of our friendship.
Gorgeous. Happy birthday.
Marcy. And it was just, and then they organized a video of my friends and family from all over the place that they played for me at an outdoor little lunch we had a few months later. It was great.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And
So it was very creative, and it was certainly, I was like, this is no big deal. It's not a big birthday. It is a big birthday, but it's not a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, who cares? So it was very special.
that is very special. And I take it, Marcy, that was you, Marcy. A little bit.
Yeah, she authored a great poem.
So I think we can appreciate that and are warmed by stories where people have gone out of their way to do something creative. And someone says, I think creativity is dance, music, painting, as opposed to, I think creativity is creative problem solving. I think creativity is an aspect of friendship, of really thinking how to reach people at this time. I'm struck by how many people are really isolated right now, and how a lot of Jewish institutions have not been particularly creative about reaching out to them. So I'm just going to own the fact that today is Giving Tuesday, and I've heard from every single Jewish organization and other organization. And you know when the last time I heard from all of them? Last Giving Tuesday. Everything has been super transactional. And we know that people give to success and not distress. And we know that people give to organizations that love them the most. And some organizations are really creative about the love. They figured out how to reach people in times like this. I wish if I ran an organization, everyone on my board and every staff member would be tasked with having 5 or 10 families that they had to be in touch with, right? And when I mean in touch, I don't mean one call, how are you? I received one of those calls. It was deeply uninspiring, right? Hi, how are you? Just checking in. Well, and what if I said, actually, I'm not doing so well? I don't know. That person couldn't have gone through the list. But what would it mean for every 3 weeks you to call a family and just say, how are you doing? Because honestly, there are a lot of organizations that are not going to survive for a variety of reasons at the end of this. And one of those reasons will be, you didn't reach me in my time of need. You weren't here for me. And so it's hard for me to be there for you in your time of need, right? And I think if you care about the Jewish organizations that either you serve them professionally or in a lay capacity, this is something we've got to think really hard about, how to be creative about reaching out. Now, people have done lovely things around holidays, right? Organizations have done lovely things, but that's not minimizing the day-to-day isolation and pain that a lot of people are experiencing right now. So think about how we might want to be creative at this moment and reach out to some people and show the love. All right, we're going to go back. I'm going to go back to our screen share, and I want to think about creativity and routine. So we talked about creativity in space. I'm actually just going to plug in and make sure that we don't run out of charge. Famous line by William Faulkner: "I write when the spirit moves me, and the spirit moves me every day." Right. So people say, well, I'd like to be creative, but I can only be creative, when I feel like all these conditions need to be met. My muse must come to me on union time. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. So in terms of the creativity that comes out of routine, there's a fantastic book on everyday rituals where many of these quotes are from. Someone who studied the daily rituals of artists and discovered that many of them have, not only do they have routine, they're actually almost obsessive about the routines that they have. What about obstructions to creativity? In writing, you must kill all your little darlings. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. The urge to destroy is also a creative urge. So I want to talk about this statement by Faulkner, which many writers know and cite, is that you have to kill all your little darlings. Sometimes we fall in love with certain creative aspects of ourselves. And I know many people who have written books, and they occupy large portions of their basements, right? Creativity has to be nurtured, and sometimes it also has to be limited. Not everything that we produce is a work of art, and I find for myself as a writer that it's not only about writing; it's really about editing. That's really what makes a book is the editing process, and it is harsh and it is painful, and sometimes you love that sentence and you love the way that it came out. But if you're going to be honest with yourself, someone else told you you got to take it out, and your editor is your closest friend. Your editor is going to make you sound good. Now, for people who are not in a writing sort of process, there are all kinds of ways that we edit ourselves in life. Anyone want to share a way that you self-edit in life? Thoughts? Well, there were things you certainly wanted to say, maybe to one of your adult children, and you kind of edited that out, right? There are all kinds of sort of filters that there was that email that you wrote to someone you work with who you really resent the way they handled something, and then you didn't send it, right? So I think the editing process, and I really do believe that there's a lot of creativity in what we don't say, what we don't write, what we don't share, and why we make those decisions. So I want to bring things together, because I mentioned just from the world of the creative arts, things that people do in terms of routine and space and certain kinds of behaviors that help to generate creativity, limit creativity, and discipline creativity. But I want to go back to the image of the Mishkan, this beautiful portable sanctuary, and how it was built. The reason I think that the sanctuary needed to be particularly beautiful is that it is not because it would attract adherents and members, because I imagine that some of you go to beautiful, beautiful synagogues that are empty. And some people go to synagogues that aren't pretty beautiful, that aren't very nice aesthetically, but there's real spirit in them. I think the reason that the person who built the Betzalel had to be a creative person who had this sort of inner wisdom was that the sanctuary was going to travel in the desert. It was going to travel in the wilderness, in a place where everything was unpredictable. And you needed to craft a building which would be assembled and disassembled each time the same way, so that no matter what degree of uncertainty people were experiencing, they had a spiritual heart at the center of their community. And that's where I think our creativity needs to be directed right now as a Jewish community. We're in the wilderness. The wilderness is the perfect metaphor for the experience that we're having now. And if you look up the word midbar, desert or wilderness, in a concordance, right, in a dictionary of words that appear in the Bible, you'll see a number of different descriptions. The wilderness is a place of predatory creatures. It's a place of stark imagery and harsh weather. It's a place of flash floods. It's a place where certain creatures can live and others cannot. It's a place in Jeremiah where God says, look how we went into the wilderness together. We loved each other in this romantic sort of chaste environment where it was just the two of us. That's a beautiful creative image. But when you're trying to keep people together over a long period of time, months and months, or in the case of the book of Numbers, years and years, 40 years in the desert, you need to have a spiritual center which is predictable. And that comes from the creativity of certain kinds of individuals committed, right? That deep wisdom, that's not only expertise, but manages to get people's hearts and volunteer and contribute to this project. So I want to just end with that image. To ask you what your spiritual center, you don't have to respond, but really to reflect on what the spiritual center for you is in your Jewish life right now. And then to expand that in a gesture of generosity of how we can create this Mishkan. Our creativity right now, it really needs to be directed to keeping a heart of community together, even when we can't see each other physically. That's going to take a lot of creative thinking. And I want to invite you into that creative process, whether that's building up an institution and maintaining an institution, or whether that's really getting together a group of people in study, in communion, in exercise, in worship, whatever that is, whatever that heart needs to be. And I'm just open to any questions you have, observations, thoughts.
I'll be kind of brave to share this, and I'm sorry, I always like to do creative things while I'm doing something, especially listening to you. So I try to write while I'm learning inspirational quotes, and you just gave me a ton of them. So thank you. I put them in a journal, and I find that journaling really is a great outlook, and actually writing about the pandemic each week or every month to do updates. I send them to my family and my heart and soul into these little COVID chronicles. So I think it's helping me process, and I really believe the power of writing to heal. And even just writing inspirational quotes down or writing on rocks, the little pick me up little notes, putting them in special places for people to see, silly things like that. And I seem to brighten people's days. So just little inspirational things on a daily basis lift my spirits, but hopefully others.
Gorgeous. In fact, my own journal is right here. I have a friend who does not journal. She's a woman in her 70s. She said, I decided that I was going to write every day of the pandemic. I was going to really capture this experience. And sometimes we're so in it that we don't think we need to describe it. How are we going to explain this to other people, right? Generations from now, the kind of restrictions and also the kind of friendships that we've seen, the kind of giving that we've seen. So thank you so much for sharing that. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Harvey? Hi.
Yes, question here. To what extent do you think our community leaders and maybe even our government leaders have planned for life in a post-COVID era?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question of the moment, because I think a lot of leaders are in survival mode, right? So they're just thinking sort of 3 feet ahead. I do think, and I say this, my husband works for the National Institutes of Health and is a flu expert. I do think that there are people who are doing a lot of planning on the medical side for what things could look like afterwards. I do think that it's very hard. As I speak regularly to heads of schools, right, and they're just trying to get to the end of the day, and they can't make anybody happy right now. So the thought of what school is going to look like, but you do need to have people with that kind of expertise who are thinking, who are saying, what are we going to do? I think there are people in business who certainly thinking that way. What are we going to do afterwards? But I think that's a question every citizen has to ask. And one of the things that, I think is incumbent upon us, maybe our greatest creative juices that have to be dedicated right now to reaching across the aisle. We're in an extremely fractured country. We're in a political landscape of contempt. And so to me, an act of creativity is to say, I may not have voted the way that you voted, but I need to hear why you voted that way and what your concerns are and how I can make your life better. And if we cannot do, I can't rely on leaders to do that. We need to rely on ourselves to do that. We need to create communities. I'm distressed by the number of people who have totally alienated members of their family and their friend group who they no longer speak to because of the way that they voted. And, being a Jewish person, I'm amazed at the intellectual curiosity in the Talmud. And it's not a page, it's not one page, it's a page of conclusions. It's all a page of debate and argument. And the debates got heated, but you can argue, and then you can pray next to someone, and you can be in community with someone, and you can value the diversity. So I'm really concerned that we're, on the one hand, we're so exquisitely sensitive to issues of race and diversity, and then we cancel people who don't agree with our positions. And I don't know how to live in a world that way. And I can't leave that up to someone else. Maybe that's, Harvey, I don't know if that's the answer that you wanted, but I think that's upon us to do. And if we're going to, I'd like to see the Jewish community model this for other communities, that we're able to use our culture of debate in a healthy and rigorous way that says, I can argue with you and I can love you. Yeah, Cheryl?
So I have these 6 students, right? 3 come from staunchly Republican families and 3 come from staunchly Democratic families. So we have noticed that there tends to be a lot of disagreement on vast array of issues. And so my students and I have been doing some brainstorming. How can we have conversations around these issues and be passionate about our views and still make room for our friends?
Yeah.
At the table. And so
how's it going?
It's going really well. We're experimenting, and one of the things we've been wondering about is that, in the news we hear about, okay, we need to reach across the aisle and we need to embrace one another, but we're not really ever taught the skills for how to do that. No. So I think there's this longing to do that, but a lot of us grown-ups, we don't even know how to start. So my students and I are trying to figure it out, and we're going to come up with something, and we'll try it, and then we'll share it with some other people, maybe some adult groups, and see how that works.
Yeah, I actually I've been in conversation with Arthur Brooks, who teaches at Harvard's Kennedy School, and he wrote a book called Love Your Enemy, and he's a religious Catholic who ran the American Enterprise Institute, and so he's a conservative thinker who's really put a lot of effort into thinking about that very question. How do we have these conversations? David Brooks, I think it was last week on a Friday column or the week before, wrote an article about how to have a serious conversation, how to have a deep conversation, how to have deeper conversations with people where we don't make assumptions about people based on the way that they vote. I think that this is going to require a great deal of creativity, because to your point, Cheryl, I don't think we've learned appropriately how to do that. In fact, if anything, we're hearing so much. Social media is really reinforcing all kinds of negative stereotypes in the way that we interact with each other. So that's a challenge. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? The Raskus family have been very quiet. I just want to say very, very quiet. I'm waiting for them to jump in.
We just thought you wanted to be the star of the show.
No, Adina, you're always the star. You're the star.
No, thank you very much. We've actually been doing nothing. We've been at home full time and do not have any of these creative schools. The only thing I still do is I still do my old ladies ballet class on Zoom.
That's very impressive.
Yes.
Let me ask you, your husband's not in that class, right? I'm just clarifying.
I don't think so. When I started it, I was 40 years old, and now I'm the second to the oldest in the class.
Well, hats off to you. I think that's extremely impressive.
Erica.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think a number of our local and national organizations have been incredibly creative in the way they've organized to meet challenges they never expected. Out of that, they've created new paradigms of how to bring people together in communities, how to reach out to people who never wanted to be part of the community because they see the need and the role the community plays. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the innovations that we've gathered, and that we need to build on them as we move forward in the future.
Absolutely. And I'm delighted that you said that. I want to reinforce that. I've had some amazing conversations across organizations that would not have had not been for COVID. People really thinking creatively about doing scenario planning post-COVID. To Harvey's point, I do want to say though, I don't think that we've done a good enough job of letting people know that these conversations are taking place. And I'll just share a closing thought with you. Dan and Chip Heath wrote a wonderful book about change and how to change things when change is hard, called Switch. And in the book, they talk about the destination postcard, of creating a picture of the life that you want to have, or the organization that you want to have, or the family that you want to have. What does that destination postcard look like? And who's receiving that postcard? And I think, to Tasha's point, important point, there are a lot of organizations that are doing this work. Not everyone is sending out a destination postcard to the constituents and saying, here's what we want the community to look like. I think we're ready for that. I think we're now seeing on the horizon, we're seeing vaccines, we're seeing a new political climate, at least a political change. And I think now's the time when we have to give people that postcard and say, this is what we, and that's the creative energy. This is what we think can come out of this crisis. Here's the picture of community that we envision, because I think amazing things will be happening that we can't even predict and that we can't plan, but we can put our heads together and do something magical that we couldn't do before, because we're in such uncharted territory. And when I think about what it means to be in the wilderness, in the ancient wilderness, to have this tabernacle that stayed with us and crossed through to the promised land with us. There is a promised land, and we will get there, and we will be better as a result. So thank you, and thank you for being part of that process and that journey.
Erica, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Really, I love being in the wilderness with you. This was just a beautiful space for me to think about, kind of this unprecedented and uncharted territory we are all part of. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening and for coming on a little late with us, and and thank you again, Erica, for giving us so much to think about and to really unlock our own creative juices, because I think we all have that. And so anyway, I want to wish everyone a wonderful evening, and I hope you will continue to join us for future events. One of the beauties of I think this time too is we've broken down some barriers, and we are engaging people that really we've never engaged with before. So we really hope that you'll continue to join us, and we can all learn together and grow together. So good night, everyone, And until next time.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night, Erica.
Good night.
Good night.